Our next session is called Emerging Threats in the Healthcare IT Ecosystem. Many of you were involved in the health tech-led collaboration roundtables yesterday where we talked about vulnerabilities with Ralph, who we'll be hearing from right now. Again, per the theme today, this is one of the most important areas we believe is not being emphasized enough in this modernization effort that we're experiencing. So we are excited to hear from Ralph to talk about some threats, and I guarantee you may be a little scared by the end of this session. So Ralph, I'll let you take it from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Prem. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody had fun last night. I did. I have a bit of a headache. But I'm doing fine. So emerging threats in healthcare ecosystem. First, let me introduce myself for those of you who I haven't met yet. My name is Ralph Echemendia, and I basically have been doing this ethical hacking, which is an oxymoron of a term, but basically all kinds of security testing for the last 20 years. I've been a security researcher. I developed a number of course curriculums for teaching ethical hacking to the federal government, among other organizations as well. One of my specialties is in virtualized infrastructures, which is what we now call the cloud. So I was doing that for a long time before it was called the cloud. But it's a whole other bunch of issues surrounding that, which we'll talk about today. I've done a lot of different kinds of things, from PCI audits to HIPAA-related audits to you name it. So to me, it all kind of looks the same. From my point of view, what we do hasn't really changed that much. There's been a lot of regulatory compliance issues that have arisen since then, but for the most part, it's all the same issues, technically speaking. So moving on, a little overview here. First thing I want to go over is a little history of cyber threats, and the reason for that is I want to kind of show you how we're really reactive for the most part, and we can only be so proactive, and you'll understand why in a minute. We'll talk about information vulnerabilities, which is really what the majority of these are. The problems that you're having in healthcare have to do with information vulnerabilities. You're leaking information, right? So we'll talk about what kind of information vulnerabilities exist. Talk about some data breaches. Medical cybercrime, that's the next frontier when it comes to, at least in the healthcare industry. We'll also talk about the cloud and the future. So on this slide here, what I want you to look at here, and this is a little bit technical, but without getting into technical detail, the very top part of that is a network security timeline. And the bottom part of it is a web application security timeline. So network and application, right? And you'll note all the little black circles there are events that have happened over a period of time. The very first event that took place that kind of got the attention was in 1988, actually 86. It was called the Morris Worm. Robert Morris Jr., the son of a professor out in, I believe it was Berkeley, had access to a computer, wrote a worm, which we now call a virus. But what it did was it brought down, I think it was 98% of ARPANET at the time, which was what we now call the internet. And you can find that floppy disk over in some museum in Washington, D.C., because it's actually part of history. Now, it took that incident to basically create the first network firewall. Before that, there was no such thing as a network firewall. So that incident, many years later, we see that in 1992, the creation of a firewall. Then after that, we see that things like the Satan or ISS security scanner came out a few years after that. And then patch management started coming out in relation to these tools coming out. Of course, these tools were not only used by the security professionals, which didn't exist at the time. They were more like system administrators. That's what they call them, right? And then you have PatchLink, and then you see another event take place. Around the same time that these security scanners came out, you'll notice that right after that, you see another little black circle there. Targeted mass hacking started taking place as a result of the same tools that we're using for finding the holes were being used to break into a number of different things. And then PatchLink came out, which was supposed to be a solution to deal with patching things. Well, it didn't work very well. Now you see again, a little bit later, you see IP chains, which is another firewall in Linux that came out. Then you see, as we go down that timeline, you see Windows Update came out. In fact, up until 1999, 98, 97, around there was no Windows Update, right? And you see NESA's consultants and penetration testing became adopted. And the point of this is to show you that it takes an event to then create the adoption of a technology that is to address the event. And it takes some time for the adoption to happen. So here we are now, and this one only goes to 2008 on the network side. But you'll notice PCI is in there, and HIPAA and that sort of thing is now, again, adopted, and there's technologies that have been adopted to address those issues. On the bottom hand side of this, we have web applications. Everything now is an application. Everything now is an app. The truth is most hackers, malicious or otherwise, no longer focus on the network anymore. We don't care about the network. What we really care about is the application, because the application has data. And that's what the problems around HIPAA are supposed to be around, privacy. However, the only reason that this is of interest to those in the criminal world is because you happen to hold a few little data points in there that they can make money on, primarily social security numbers and that sort of thing that has nothing to do with healthcare. For the most part, at least right now, the incidents are not that they're going after medical data, per se. They're going after the stuff they can resell, the stuff that they can make money on, right? So everything's at the application layer now. And if you look at the application timeline here, again, just look at the little black ones are different events that took place. Code Red, we have the SAMI worm. Mass SQL injection started taking place around 2006, 2007. And that's database injection, getting access to the database. And you see certain little green ones being certain organizations founded and adopted for the purpose of addressing issues surrounding web applications. Now, you'll notice that once we get to over 2012, 2013, broad SDL adoption. And there's a question mark there because we haven't really had that. And SDL is software development lifecycle. The majority of the problems that exist, if not all the problems that exist on applications, can't be fixed by the network guys. It can only be fixed by the programmers. So the programmers are not really trained to program with security in mind. And that's one of the biggest issues surrounding these application problems. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of, again, events taking place that then create the adoption of a certain technology that's developed for the purpose of addressing the issues that that event caused. Right? So it takes some time, and that's my point to this. So what are information vulnerabilities, and do we really understand what the risk is? And this is just a very kind of simple way for me to explain risk. Over here on the right-hand side, we have vulnerabilities. What are vulnerabilities? Of course, these are weaknesses in one way or another that expose the organization to some risk. And understanding your risk is very important to being able to manage that risk. So vulnerabilities can be anything from software bugs, it can be broken processes, it could be ineffective controls, hardware flaws, human error, you name it. Business changes. Now the threats are, the agents here, if you would. We have angry employees or dishonest employees, we have criminals, we have competitors, we have hackers, we have just nature, we have governments, we have terrorists, we have the press, we have all kinds of different attack or threat vectors here. And if you kind of take this formula, you're going to end up with what risk is, right? So what is risk? We have business disruption, financial losses, loss of privacy, damage to reputation, loss of confidence, legal issues, you name it. The biggest concern when it comes to healthcare that doesn't exist in, say, finance or other industries is loss of life. That's one that really hits home with healthcare, and you'll see what I mean with some of the issues that exist recently when it comes to the security of certain medical devices and such. So data leaks really started coming out in the press in 2008 is when we started seeing a flurry of press when it comes to data leaks. Corporations and the government basically have proved themselves to be lax in the way they were dealing with security. And that's when it really started kind of driving it home to a lot of different people. Doesn't really matter the size of the organization. In fact, in some cases, the bigger they are, the harder they fall when it comes to some of these hacks. So users are routinely using and sharing data because that's, in fact, the whole idea behind networking. That's the whole idea behind the technologies that have been created. And we realize that their needs are outside of just, they have so many different needs that not only on the inside, but on the outside of collaborating and sharing information. So we enable that kind of sharing, and that's to some degree where the problems happen too. So almost 30% of organizations, and this is across the board, across industries, so in certain industries it'd be higher, but across all industries, at least 30% of organizations store contact, financial data, personal data, in this case patient records, on removable media of some sort, whether it's a removable hard drive or whether it's a USB stick or whether it's a mobile device. Okay, it's still mobile. It's not exactly in a data center anymore. So from here, we start seeing some issues related to unprotected or unsafe data. One example of that is used hardware. I know we've talked to some of you who are telling me about, a laptop has been stolen. That's happened, I think, to almost every organization I've ever known. And what's on that laptop is what creates a problem, right? If you guys go on Google and you start searching around for used hard drives, go on eBay so that we can get to the point. You'll notice that used hard drives cost more than new hard drives on eBay. Why would that be? Because the demand for used hardware is higher due to the fact that it has data that can be recovered. And a lot of people never even thought about, well, how do we destroy our equipment after the fact? How do we make sure that it's clean before we kind of give it away or throw it away or whatever it is we're going to do? So it has, it's unimaginable the amount of confidential information that is out there in used hard drives. That's just one example of, these data leaks being all over the place. Do they cost money? Well, this is what we start getting into now. The average organizational cost of a data security breach in the U.S. has dropped from 24%, from 5.5 million in 2011 to from 7.2 million in 2010 to the latest report for 2011 saying 5.5 million. This is according to the latest report from the Ponemon Institute. Now, based on this report, which also, what they actually did is they look at 49 different companies in different industries. 14 different industries, including healthcare. The average cost per record also dropped for the first time in 2011 from $214 per record, and this was in 2010, to now $194 per record. Awesome, right? This is the first time ever in the history of this report that has been going on for 7 years that this has ever happened, that anything has actually gotten better, that there's been a decline. So you would think this is great news, right? Now, that's not true for healthcare. That's the one industry that increased. While all other industries decreased the cost, healthcare went up. In an earlier report, Ponemon found that the health data breaches increased 32% from 2010 to 2011. It's the only industry with an increase. The average cost to an organization, again, per record, grew 10% last year. The average per capita cost is now $240 for healthcare. It's $194 for everybody else, but $240 for healthcare per record is what they estimate this to be. Another Redspin report on the state of health IT security found that the total number of health records breaches are up, and the report says that they increased 97%. The Ponemon Institute says 10% or 32% overall, and this other report, Redspin, says that in healthcare it's grown 97%. Now, this is just some examples of the largest healthcare data breaches. And this is, there are some up-to-date ones here, but just some examples here. TRICARE in Virginia, 4.9 million records. What do you think the costs of that would be? It's pretty ridiculous, the kind of numbers we're talking about here. And that was due to a loss of backup tapes. As you go down this list here, which is, of course, is from the highest to lowest, you see the second one, HealthNet in California, 1.9 million records, unknown. I mean unknown. They don't even know how they lost the records. Then we have electronic medical record theft. We have laptop theft. We have loss of backup tapes again, hard drive theft, desktop computer theft, not even a laptop, desktop computer theft. Somebody took a desktop. We have loss of portable electronic devices, hacking. This is the first time you actually see hacking down there, and computer theft. Now, if you really want to kind of stay on top of this, you actually can go to this website here, dataloss.db, and I'm going to bring it up for a second so you guys can see actual. And you can go by month. And here's the latest incidents, with the most latest being 10/18/2012, 27,000 records at, what is that? Blount Memorial Hospital. And this is for all of them, not just for healthcare. So this is across PCI, HIPAA, whatever. Any violations, any incidents like that. Little Caesars. Oh, Little Caesars had an issue. It's a shame. But you get the idea. I mean, this stuff is happening all the time, and these things do cost money. And we really have hard costs and we have soft costs. We talked about this with some of you when we were doing the little roundtables. You know, hard costs are, you know, the fines, the lawyers, but then there's a lot of soft costs we can't possibly foresee, such as lawsuits. You know, if you have any kind of major lawsuit come against your organization, the cost is not $194 or $240 per incident. So we see all of these different things, and like I said, these information breaches and leaks are everywhere. They're not just an issue of hardware. They're everywhere. And one of the best examples I have for that is, you know, I'll show you live on Google how we can find Social Security numbers, how we can find. And the only difference from what I'm doing to doing it to your organization is targeting your organization. That's it. I'm not targeting an organization in this example, and I'm also not doing anything illegal. So I'll just put the disclaimer out there. So let's go to Google. Now these things are called Google Dorks, so that's the term that we use for them. But wrong Google. But basically, there's all kinds of stuff that I can do in this search field that most people don't really know you can do. I'll use one as an example that I always used to love doing at the GTRA government conferences, because you have a bunch of government people, and I like to scare them a little bit. So, you know, I'd use like, you know, and this is just to give you an example. So what I typed in there, and let me go up here, is site:/mil, which is for what? Military websites. File type doc, which is for Word documents. Classified. So what Google does is it goes out to every .mil out there, and it finds Word documents with the word classified in the document. Now, if you want to talk about an information leak, and some of these leaks are hard to be able to actually address without it crippling your operational capabilities, but if you even look at this very first page, first of all, note that the number of records that come back according to this is 6,480. Note that every single one of these is a Word document. This is not a website. This is a Word document, right? Now, why am I interested in Word documents? All Microsoft Office documents contain the entire history of that file since it was created. And if you don't understand what I mean by that is, go ahead and open up one of your contracts, select everything and delete it, and look at the size of the file. It doesn't change, even though you're looking at a white page. Well, hackers can take a Word document and look at all of that deleted content in there. So you'd be surprised to what you find people deleted. No attorney starts with a blank document. They start with another document they used before. So you can look at all kinds of information, financial information, passwords, all kinds of stuff. So this is just one very simple example. Now, yesterday I did this purposely to find some Social Security numbers. And, you know, don't recommend you share this with too many people, but I'm going to do site:/com. And again, the only difference here is that I'm not choosing a healthcare organization. I'm just saying any .com. I'm going to say file type, and this is not documented by Google, these operators here. And I'm saying SQL, which is a database file. And then after that, I'm going to put, let's see, Social Security. That's simple. Now, you'll note 2,550 SQL files. Keep in mind, there's many other types of files and other types of Google tricks that could be done to find information like this. But just with this one, there's 2,550 of these files that contain the word Social Security in them. And they're all database files, which means they're storing something to a database, right? The very first one here, I hope none of you use New Think Tank, whatever that is, because that right there is exactly the kind of issues that we have with information vulnerabilities, and the same kind of issues that you have in healthcare. What in the world is this right here? A Social Security number. And they're all names, addresses, emails, and Social Security numbers. Pretty much everything that anyone needs, including date of birth, to do identity theft. There's quite a few there if you wanted to take somebody's identity. Okay? Now, as I look at this a little bit more, the more troubling thing is this seems to be like a veterans database, because every single one of these names has a war associated with it. At the very end of that, you'll notice it says a number of different things, depression, armed services, and so these are all vets, and from what I can tell. And this list goes on and on and on. And that's just one example of how information vulnerabilities are that easy to find. And in fact, in many cases, I don't even really have to go directly to the website. With certain types of documents, Google allows me to click on this little cache thing, so they would never even have a log of my IP address being there, ever. And then secondly, even though I just clicked on it and went there directly, that's not illegal. If you left it out, sorry, that's just the way it works. That's why Google has the ability to show me this information. So it's really kind of on whoever is at New Think Tank to really not do that, okay? But there's a whole bunch of other Google tricks that I could show you that would blow your mind, as far as username and passwords, all kinds of different things, juicy information in certain documents, and you name it. Now, medical cybercrime, the next frontier. This is really scary. One of my friends, I'll tell you a story, in fact, specifically related to Chicago. In late July, an interesting story came out of the Chicago suburbs. Hackers broke into a small medical practice server, encrypted patient and electronic medical records and emails. They stole all of this and demanded a ransom. Now, remember when I was saying about how things are being monetized and they're only really monetizing a Social Security number? Well, here's another example of how things are being monetized. Now, of course, in this case, this organization, the Surgeons of Lake County, turned the server off immediately when they received this ransom note, and called the police, and did not pay the ransom, needless to say. No hackers were ever caught. Cops had no idea what to do here. And long story short is, they don't even know if these hackers were involved with any of the other hacks. But just, in fact, in 2009, 37 hospitals and doctors nationwide reported being hacked. And those are the ones that know they got hacked. How many do not know they got hacked? My concern here is that there is going to be, and I work in a lot of different industries, there is going to be different ways that data is being monetized. And right now, they're only monetizing on a couple of different points, like I said, Social Security being one of them. But as things change, I think and I know that medical data will also be monetized in some way. And some of the ways that this happens is pretty bizarre. Another major concern on this cybercrime next frontier of healthcare is the use of this technology can be hacked to kill somebody. Most recently, well, there's two different issues there. Number one is that of counterfeit medical devices. According to the World Health Organization, 8% of all medical devices worldwide are counterfeit. They don't go through whatever processes and procedures we have to go through here. So it's although these devices and equipment are mainly found in other countries, we have found them, and they have found their way here due to basically insecure supply chains. So they are getting in, even though they might be in small percentages. It's of a concern. Now, why? Well, in this case, at the 2011 DEF CON conference in Vegas, that is, by the way, if you've never heard of it, that's our hacker conference. 15,000 hackers from around the world converge on Vegas for a weekend. And it's nothing like anything I think you can ever imagine. It's not a conference. It's really, it's like, you've heard of Comic-Con where it's kind of like a Comic-Con, but it's about something as opposed to just, but they do dress funny and walk around. We have all kinds, from the professionals to the 14-year-old kids that I don't even know how they got to Vegas. And there's a lot of us. And it's really just an open collaborative environment. We don't wear badges with names on them. We wear badges that say human. Unless you work there and you got different badges, goons and so on. It's a very interesting conference, and everything is hacked. Every possible thing you can imagine is being attempted to be hacked or, is talked about. Well, in 2011, Jay Radcliffe, which is also a penetration tester, a security professional, reverse engineered basically an insulin pump, his own, a Medtronic insulin pump, and was able to basically manipulate the amount on the dosage remotely, which means potentially you can kill somebody remotely who's connected to an insulin pump. He successfully was able to hack his own insulin pump on stage, showed it, and discovered these loopholes that, again, could be used potentially in a bad way, right? Now, again, this is scary because you can, from a cybercrime perspective, if a criminal professional hacker was hired to kill somebody, they now can without a gun. And that's really, really scary. Then that actually caused a bit of an uproar here, or right over across the way in Washington, and the Government Accountability Office was called in. 2 members of Congress actually asked the Government Accountability Office to review Federal Communication Commission's approach when it came to how they deal with medical devices with wireless capabilities such as insulin pumps. The truth is medical devices, in comparison to a lot of the other technology we use day to day, generally use poorly developed code when it comes to security. In fact, sometimes non-existent code when it comes to security. They look at the functionality of the device and its ability to operate. That's it. Very rarely, the guys who wrote the code for these devices never thought that somebody's going to be trying to hack a medical device. That's a big concern. Now, how about remotely hacking basically a pacemaker? So that was in 2011, and at the Breakpoint Security Conference in Melbourne, Barnaby Jack, who's another friend of mine who works for IO Active out of Seattle, demonstrated that he could reverse engineer basically a pacemaker to deliver fatal shocks to the person with the pacemaker, remotely within 30 feet of the person. Now, the interesting thing is the pacemaker also contained a secret function in his presentation. In other words, he was able to reverse engineer a pacemaker, remotely write to the firmware, the software inside of the pacemaker, rewrite the software in such a way where it could act like a virus, and any other pacemaker within 30 feet of it could also be overwritten. So it's really, really crazy what can be done with these medical technologies that don't have. So it's not just a problem of the records being an issue, but this is really, really concerning. Because again, this is the one industry where it really does impact lives immediately. And then we go into cloud computing as being another major threat, or there could be major threats here. I'm going to give you a little brief into what is cloud computing. I came from a company called Terramark, which was bought by Verizon. I no longer work there. I'm not part of the Verizon family, I'm sorry. But I was there for many years, and we, at the time, were the federal cloud ran on our data centers. And so I can give you a lot of insight here into what the cloud actually looks like, other than the ones we see up in the air. what your provider should be offering, and some of the future challenges and current challenges and risks related to putting your data on the cloud. Now, drivers for the cloud, well, there's a wide range of offers out there when you're putting it on the cloud. It's real simple. I don't have to go to a data center anymore. I don't have to worry about waiting for the power and the bandwidth and the servers. I can just turn things up rather quickly. Very easy to scale and deploy, scale up, scale down, decommission. Latest technologies are easy to bring up on the cloud as well. Now, this is one of the areas that we get into was collective intelligence of different professional services group, vendors, and service providers. Bottom line is, whoever your cloud provider is, you want them to be part of all the cloud security alliance. You want them to be communicating with other organizations when it comes to issues surrounding the cloud. But the bottom line is it saves time, it saves money in many cases, it's a cost issue. Now, compliance mandates, risk mitigation techniques should map directly to the provider's capabilities. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times you don't even fully understand the provider's capabilities on the cloud and what they can and cannot offer you, what they're responsible for and what they're not. So let's talk about some of that. Now, I'm not going to go into, it's a bit of a death by PowerPoint here, but these are the things that were built into the cloud at Terramark. Okay, just to give you an example, so you can think about the amount of security that's involved just in the virtual machine that you bring up. Okay, I'll show you in a pretty picture. So we had on one side here we had the portal you go through to set up all your stuff secured. You have distinct firewall rules for every individual client, private rule sets. That's managed by the customer. High availability firewalls, load balancers. We have NAT doing inbound and outbound traffic. This is a bit technical here, but I just want to show you the amount of different layers of security, and this is just at the built-in level, meaning the virtualized level. Virtual machines that run in its own OS instances. All this is managed by the customer, right? They can oversubscribe to CPU, and that CPU is specific for that customer. And really understanding this when you just buy cloud computing, it's better to have a good idea of what's behind all that, right? Dedicated IP addresses, storage, only accessible by the customer. You have user authentication, remote VPN. Now, everything that you see here is basically the standard that Amazon Cloud or Verizon has. This is just what the customer has provided, and for the most part, the customer manages all of these individual little things, right? And so we call them built-in. Now, there's bolted on, which means these things are not virtual, and in most cases is something the customer has to pay extra for. Now, so everything else that you see here is not built into most clouds. So from continuous compliance, DHS mandated equipment, to anti-DDoS, DNS security, scalability and peering, IPS, IDS, application whistleblowing, content filtering, Citrix application firewalls, SSL accelerators. We have all these different things, network taps to ensure that we can do packet capture and net flow across devices for analytics, inter-VM monitoring. These are all security devices in one way or another. Intel has a new trusted execution technology, which means even in a virtual environment, if you move a virtual machine from one server to another server, it won't work. It's tied to the CPU. So things are getting better from a technological perspective, and the cloud, and for the most part, these are things that are important to understand as you're going in and evaluating different cloud providers. I know this seems tech, but the point is, I just want you to realize we have down here is kind of an interesting point here: storage, DoD wipes, data spillage procedures, forensic capture issues, and we'll talk more about that because that's something that we had a lot of experience in, being one of the first to be deploying this sort of thing for the enterprise. But as you can tell, there's a gazillion different security things going on here, all of which are bolted on. They're rarely built in to the environment. So, archival's encrypted, vulnerability scanning, database scanning, static and dynamic code testing. All of the things that you see here are basically the sort of things that they have to bring in consultants to do. And in many cases, certain cloud providers don't even allow and or have the ability to bolt on certain ones of these issues here, or these devices. So there's lots of challenges here, lots of moving parts. You really have to understand service level agreements on the cloud. You really have to understand root cause analysis. Something goes wrong and you're on the cloud, is figuring out, after you see all that, figuring out where it went wrong could be a bit of an issue, more so than in a traditional environment. Forensics, major issue. And I failed to say that earlier. I have spent the last 3 or 4 years mainly working with attorneys, dealing with lawsuits from a forensic perspective. And once we get into forensics on the cloud, things get a little gray. Because forensics in the normal world, if you would, are very easy. Give me your hard drive. Let me have your computer. I'll make a copy of it. That's what we do. We take it back. We analyze. Oh, boom. That's it. E-discovery. All that kind of same thing. On the cloud, we can't make an image of a petabyte of a hard drive the size of this room. So all kinds of challenges start happening, especially when it comes to doing forensics in memory and forensics on the network, because it's not actually a switch, it's a virtual switch. So that is quite a shift, and we have had to run into a lot of different problems there. We have a lot of issues to deal with. Now the mindset has changed not only because of the cloud, but because of a number of security incidents. The mindset has now changed from basically continuous compliance to performance, from actually what we used to call point in time. A lot of these security tests that we would do were really just a snapshot in time. If I took a week to do it, by the time I finished the report, your environment's already different. On a penetration test, it would normally take twice as long as it took to do the test to write the report, because you have all of these different tools with all of this data that I now have to put into a human readable report. And so by the time the report is done, in most cases the environment is different already. So this point in time snapshot has changed, and the mindset is now continuous compliance and performance assurance. The mindset has also changed from we'll just build really strong walls, and we'll build our castle by just defending ourselves from anyone coming into our castle this way. We'll put up firewalls, we'll put up IDS, we'll have a moat with some alligators. That is no longer the case. The new mindset, the paradigm shift from a security perspective is they're already in. They parachuted in, they catapulted in, they're in already. But how do you know if they're in? And how do you know where they are? It's a matter of time at that point. So that's one of the major challenges and changes in the way that we're doing things. And this applies to healthcare as well as every other industry. Now, we have all kinds of new issues to deal with the cloud and with all of these problems. We have all the same old considerations, all the same old issues, plus new ones, because now we have some additional vectors that didn't exist before. One of the biggest ones is, when it comes to all this cloud computing stuff, is from a consideration from a security and compliance perspective is, where exactly is your data? Because if you're using a cloud service provider and your organization is in, say, Tennessee, your data is sitting in California, what laws apply? California law or Tennessee law? Or both? Because that's where your data is. And you don't actually even know where your data is when you're using a cloud service provider. They have the ability to move data around between their servers, between different locations. So that's one example of some of the new issues we have to deal with. From a forensic perspective, it's no longer a hard drive, it's a file now. What used to be a server is now a file in the world of the cloud. There's a number of issues surrounding incident response. So incident response, you have an incident, something happens, how do you deal with that incident when your data is on the cloud? You just turn it off? How are you going to handle that incident? Because in most cases, and this is originally when back at Terramark, one of the things I found interesting were people were looking at the cloud. At the time, we didn't even call it the cloud. That's a marketing term. We call it Data Center 2.0 because it was the same thing as co-location. It was just, now you don't have to go and plug into the rack, but it's the same idea. You're providing a rack, right? So the interesting thing was that most of our clients who were coming in to buy virtualization were doing it for disaster recovery. Then they brought up their disaster recovery environment on the cloud, and then it became their production environment, and then they decided, well, that's our disaster recovery too. We don't really need another disaster recovery data center. It's on the cloud. It's easy enough to move. So now I see a lot of different organizations who their disaster recovery plan is that file, that server that is now a file, is just copied to another file or server. And that's the disaster recovery plan. So it's quite different from the way it used to be. And of course, you can move on it quickly, but we're still dealing with all the same security issues, even within your disaster recovery. So if you think that it was a disaster, and you're basically use that as an incident response and say, well, we have something go down, so we have to now apply our some of the things in our disaster recovery plan, they're not going to take care of any of the security issues surrounding these issues here. So all kinds of issues, like I said, when it comes to forensics, storage systems for the cloud are huge. So we can't really do forensics the way that law enforcement requires us to. So then we're dealing with all kinds of additional considerations in dealing with law enforcement. And we have all kinds of new attack vectors, like I said. You know, we have all the same that we used to have to an outsourced data center, but now with the cloud, we actually have additional vectors to worry about. Guest to guest, guest to host, all of this, you know, architectural vulnerabilities, if you would, from virtualization. So some of the new threats that we just talked about, again, in addition to all the normal information threats, we have a number of additional ones here. Medical device hacks, which we talked about. This, I don't know if you guys hear this term, but this is one that you hear a lot in the government, advanced persistent threat. This means, like I said, they're in there and they're trying things that are 0-day, meaning not known, and you really have to be watching your network, your communications, to find these type of things. We found, I'll give you an example, one that will kind of really scare you. You watch a flash video, YouTube as an example. We found embedded malware in a YouTube video. It's not known. So you watch a video, your machine is now infected with this software that is feeding back information, in this case, to another government. So who would ever think, I mean, it's flash, it's a video. Inside of a web page, not even something that someone sent you. So that's one example of advanced persistent threat, because they're doing several different things to maintain access for a period of time. Application layer attacks, in other words, now it's all application layer attack. It's all SQL, it's all an attack on the database, an attack on the data. And issues surrounding the cloud. Now, this one has kind of been quiet, the cloud bursting. A couple of years ago, a gentleman, another security researcher, actually out of Miami, discovered a vulnerability that would allow for one virtual machine to escape the environment and be able to access other virtual machines. In a multi-tenant cloud environment, such as Terramark, Verizon, or Amazon, that would be the equivalent of, you know, American Express's cloud being able to jump to Visa's cloud. It was proven, and this proof of concept was only done once and has not been able to do it again. So we're not as concerned as we were when he did it in that environment, but it is of concern when it comes to cloud, because that's the additional layer that we didn't have before to worry about. So basically, the future, what does it look like? According to G4 Tech TV, it looks like this, and it looks good. But if the future looks like this, we are screwed, because there's a lot of technology up in that future. And that's the problem, is we're using technology only to, down here, and I think one of you guys in your talk mentioned that, the ability of what we can do with technology is way up here. Our ability to use that technology, we're still down here as to how much we use it. And I think Matt was, you know, we had this conversation about Excel. You know, if you ask somebody, everybody knows Microsoft Excel, but if you ask somebody, tell me what's on the menu bar, I think that's a good one. You can remember file, edit, and I don't remember what the other ones are. Format. And if you ask anybody, if you pull down the file menu, what's underneath the file menu? Save. I thought that's a good example of, we only remember the things we use every day, and even with something as simple as Microsoft Office, we only remember probably and or use 30 or 40% of the capabilities of that technology. So in the future, really, we have to have continuous compliance. It's not an issue of when the auditors come in. It really is something we have to look throughout. total application assurance, performance assurance, so focus on the application. There's updates to NIST and federal standards that are pushing one of these security issues in the cloud. The growth, and back to my first slide, growth and increased adoption of certain technologies and of certain processes and procedures. That's very important here. And a term that I've been using a lot now that I've never really heard too many other security professionals use is intrusion resilience. You're going to get popped. It's going to happen. The question is, how quickly can you respond to that intrusion? And that's what I call intrusion resilience. So the future, there's a growth in attack vectors, there's a growth in the complexity of these type of attacks that are taking place. There's an increase in state-sponsored cybercrime. That's, over the last couple of years, increased by a lot. An increase in arrests, which also is helping to some degree. Increase in InfoSec budgets. There's been an increase in InfoSec education, and also an increase in IT security personnel. But even with all these increases, the average IT organization spends 7% of their IT budget on security. And, you know, I would ask you to go back to your accountants and ask them how much money you spend on coffee at the hospital. Chances are you spend more on coffee than you do on security. So don't be surprised if you get popped. Okay, that's the truth. In most cases, that's what happens. So anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you very much.